My name's Fred Burks, and I guess I'm probably best known as a whistleblower. I worked with the United States Department of State for 18 years as a language interpreter and moved up the ranks and ended up even interpreting in the White House for President Bill Clinton and President George W. Bush. And it's quite a fascinating story, actually, of how I ended up there. My deepest dedication in my life has almost always been to do my best to choose what's best for all of us. I have a deep spiritual path, which is not any particular religion, but more just believing and knowing that every one of us has a place in our hearts that just wants to love and be loved. No matter how twisted, no matter how far people may have suppressed it, that place is always there. And so that has really guided me and created all sorts of miracles in my life, and among them ended up interpreting in the White House. I had never had any plans or ideas that I would do something like that. Many people are curious why I resigned from the State Department after working there 18 years, and I was actually their #1 Indonesian interpreter by the time I left. And it's a complicated story, but what it really boiled down to is that they had a secrecy agreement that they wanted all interpreters to sign, not even the top level. And I should just mention briefly, it's very bizarre, but they never required me to sign a secrecy oath, to apply for a secret clearance. I guess that's a funny story, which would be good to go into for just a minute. My boss, who was a wonderful woman, the chief of interpreting services at the State Department, had asked me if I would apply for secret clearance a number of years earlier. I don't remember what year, about 1999 or something like that. And I told her, I asked if it was required, and she said, no, it's not required, but if you don't, it can cause some difficulties that you just have to work through at other times. And because it's a very invasive procedure, takes a long time, and they interview almost everybody who knows you, I said, if I don't have to do it, I'm not going to do it. But give me the papers and I'll look over them anyway. So I decided not to do it just because it's such a hassle and I could manage without it. It caused a few minor problems, but not much. But then a few years later, back then I was not the #1 interpreter, but then eventually I became the best Indonesian interpreter. And that's when Stephanie, my boss, said, Fred, it would really help us out if you're willing to get secret clearance. I said, okay, Stephanie, I totally trust your opinion. If you really want me to do that, I will. And I think you should know one thing. I've reviewed all of the pages, and there's about 32 pages worth of information you have to fill out. And I'm basically clean on everything, but I should tell you that I did ecstasy twice 4 years ago. And I don't lie, so where it asks if you've done any illegal drugs, I will have to put that down. And she said, Fred, let's have you not apply for secret clearance. So that's why I didn't have secret clearance, and I actually ended up later doing some testimony revealing some major lies that were going on by the government in an international court. And the reason I could do that is I was never sworn to secrecy. I might have even done it if I did swear to secrecy, but it's interesting that I didn't even have to break any oaths to do that. So the reason I resigned was then they came out with this new agreement that basically said, anything that you hear, see, or do in the course of your work, you may not share with anyone without the written permission of your supervisor, or unless it's been publicly announced. And to me, that was just crazy. Because, for instance, I've had many wonderful moving stories. I got to travel with some amazing people around the United States on study tours, and heard and participated in some very wonderful, moving, inspiring experiences. I could never share about any of those without the written permission of my supervisor. And if you take it technically, which the lawyers do, I couldn't even tell my friends where I was when I'm away at a different place unless it had been publicly announced where we're visiting. So to me, I don't think that there should be no secrecy at all in government, but the level that they were asking for was absolutely excessive. And so as a result, there was other things going on as well. I was getting less and less comfortable working under the increasing secrecy and restrictions of the government, but that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And basically I said, look, I will not sign it. And finally, at first my bosses were trying to work around it. Then word came down from on high, everyone must sign it. So I said, okay, I resign. That was late 2004. Now, once I resigned, it's very interesting. A couple weeks later, I was just sitting thinking, well, wait a minute. This could actually be newsworthy. And it was not immediately I thought of this, just because, it's like, this is, a presidential interpreter is resigning because of secrecy. And through a network, and I managed this network of websites, I had developed quite a network of friends, and I had the personal emails of about 700 major media reporters. So I wrote up an email and sent out to them some to the effect of potential story, presidential interpreter, in parentheses, me, resigns because of excessive secrecy. Well, the next day I had calls from everybody, from CNN, from Washington Post, New York Times, ABC. It was quite fascinating. They were all very interested in this story because secrecy, of course, is a topic that the press is interested in. As a result of that, the Washington Post did an article on me, on my resignation, and the guy who interviewed me asked me, well, are there any particular secrets or anything that you want to tell me? And so I told him about this one meeting that I had participated in that was particularly disturbing, where, in a nutshell, they were trying to secretly capture this one guy in Indonesia and have him turned over to the United States so they could put him somewhere like Guantanamo. And as somebody there trying to make into kind of an Osama bin Laden type, it was very clear to me that this was what was going on. And the thing that was so disturbing is all of the press before and after this was saying, no, the United States is not intervening in any way with this particular Muslim cleric. And by the way, I'm not saying that this Muslim cleric was a good guy. He wants the whole world to become a Muslim state and all of this. But it's pretty clear he is not a strong advocate of violence. And it was the manipulations that bothered me, that they were going to secretly capture him and turn him over. Interestingly enough, President Megawati stood up and said no. And believe me, we were in the president of Indonesia's personal home. The ambassador was there, a CIA agent was there, the head of the National Security Council Asian branch was there. And when Megawati said, no, I can't turn him over, they all got quiet. I was like, whoa, that's not supposed to be the answer, which was interesting in itself. And they tried to pressure her heavily, but she said, look, this guy is too well known. He's basically the equivalent of a Jerry Falwell in the United States. Imagine if Jerry Falwell suddenly disappeared, and if it might be somehow linked back to the government. So that's why Megawati said, no, this guy's too well known. If he just disappears and it gets back to me, my career is gone. And she didn't say this, but this is just what we're guessing happened. So anyway, it was very disturbing to me that in all of the press they're saying, no, we've never done anything around this guy, and it was an absolute lie because they're trying to secretly capture him and send him off to Guantanamo. So when the Washington Post reporter asked me if I knew anything, I mentioned briefly about that meeting. And he said, oh, very interesting. And I was not sworn to secrecy on any of this. And so he, in his article about my resignation, put just one paragraph there saying, Burks reported that he was in a secret meeting where they were trying to manipulate Abu Bakr al-Bashir so that he would be secretly turned over to the United States. The official term is rendering, by the way. Some of you may have heard that term in the news lately. To render is to secretly capture and turn over. So that one little paragraph got quite a bit of press in Indonesia. And in fact, some of my friends that I had worked with in my interpreting saw it, and they ended up calling me and saying, what is this? And so by then I had resigned, and while I was still working with the State Department, I would not reveal secrets because that's just unethical. When I'm working with them as kind of my client, I'm not going to, unless it was something really important. If it was really important, I would even have been a whistleblower then. But this didn't, I felt like at the time, I can serve better by just continue working there and seeing what other information I can gather, knowing that someday I would reveal this. But once I resigned, as I said, the Washington Post reporter asked me, and long story short, I ended up testifying at the trial of this gentleman in Indonesia, which was being watched very closely internationally because the newspapers were all trying to make this guy out to be an evil Satan. And so my testimony was actually, it was in BBC, it was in the Boston Globe, it was in quite a number of publications. And in fact, the huge surprise to me was after it kind of slowed down some, I got quite a bit of publicity there for a while. I got a call from 2 Wall Street Journal reporters, and they were really interested. They were even interested in my research into deep cover-ups, which we'll go into in a minute. And they seemed really open. I was really surprised. They wanted to know all this stuff. And so they were calling from Indonesia, which is where they had seen some of my testimony, and we spent between 2 and 3 hours on the phone in a conversation call, and they really were interested in this story. And what I appreciated is they didn't immediately publish this story. They waited several weeks and kept emailing me questions and say, is this, they wanted to get it exactly right. And I told them, I said, I know, because the Wall Street Journal is a very conservative voice, as most of us know. I knew that part of their job was to paint me as bad. I should not be doing this, and who is this crazy guy? And I told them in emails, I said, look, I know you guys are supposed to make me look bad. All I ask is that you be really honest with your report. And I felt I had a good rapport with them. And the amazing thing was that the article actually came out on the front page of the Wall Street Journal on February 22nd, I believe it was, 2005. So I think even they were surprised about that. You know, the reporters don't decide whether it goes on page 1, but I even had one of those sketches that they do in the Wall Street Journal of, here's Fred Burks on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I was like, whoa. And it definitely was an interesting article. On one hand, they were definitely trying to tear me down, and yet on the other hand, you could see they were really trying to build me up. They had all of these quotes, like my boss, who I was so close to, they have a quote from her, he must have gone off some deep end. But then in another quote, she says oh, he's a wonderful, very intelligent man, one of our best interpreters. The woman from the National Security Council said, he's the best interpreter I've ever worked with. And that's quoted in the article. And at the same time, she said, he's lying. So I was like, whoa. So it was really a fascinating article, which I was quite pleased with. But again, you know, I have to be careful, just so you know, my own chief issue, my own growing edge is arrogance. From the time I was a kid, I thought I was better than everybody else. And it was a spiritual thing. I thought because I saw how beautiful everyone is, therefore I'm better than everyone. And so I have to be really careful when I get that much attention. It's like, let's not let this feed my ego. But I've worked on my arrogance a lot. And it feels really good that now I get it, that we're all awesome beings. It used to be, I'm so great, you know, and they're cool, but, you know, now I know that you, everyone who's watching this, and everyone of us in the world, we're amazing beings. And it's just a matter of opening up to that. And so, because I am in full surrender to what's best for all, I feel that's the reason I get put in these places, and that's why these many, many miracles happen in my life.